And God stepped out on space. He looked around and said, I'm lonely. I'll make me a world. And as far as the eye of God could see, darkness covered everything, blacker than 100 midnights down in a cypress swamp. Then God smiled, and the light broke, and the darkness rolled up on one side, and the light stood shining on the other, and God said, That's good. Then God reached out and took the light in his hands, and God rolled the light around in his hands until he made the sun. And he set that sun ablazing in the heavens. And the light that was left from making the sun, God gathered it up in a shining ball and flung it against the darkness, spangling the night with the moon and the stars. Then down between the darkness and the light he hurled the world. And God said, That's good. Then God himself stepped down, and the sun was on his right hand, and the moon was on his left. The stars were clustered about his head, and the earth was under his feet. And God walked, and where he trod, his footsteps hollowed the valleys out and bulged the mountains up. Then he stopped and looked, and saw that the earth was hot and barren. So God stepped over to the edge of the world, and he spat out the 7 seas. He batted his eyes, and the lightnings flashed. He clapped his hands, and the thunder rolled. And the waters above the earth came down. The cooling waters came down. Then the green grass sprouted. The little red flowers blossomed. The pine tree pointed his finger to the sky. And the oak spread out his arms. The lakes cuddled down in the hollows of the ground, and the rivers ran down to the sea. And God smiled again, and the rainbow appeared and curled itself around his shoulder. Then God raised his arm, and he waved his hand over the sea and over the land, and he said, Bring forth, bring forth. And quicker than God could drop his hand, fishes and fowls and beasts and birds swam the rivers and the seas, roamed the forest and the woods, and split the air with their wings. And God said, That's good. Then God walked around, and God looked around on all that he had made. He looked at his sun. He looked at his moon. He looked at his little stars. He looked on his world with all its living things, and God said, I'm lonely still. Then God sat down on the side of a hill where he could think. By a deep, wide river he sat down with his head in his hands. God thought and thought till he thought, I'll make me a man. Up from the bed of the river, God scooped the clay, and by the bank of the river he kneeled him down. And there God, the great Almighty, who lit the sun and fixed it in the sky, who flung the stars to the most far corner of the night, who rounded the earth in the middle of his hand, this great God, like a mammy bending over her baby, kneeled down in the dust, toiling over a lump of clay, till he shaped it in his own image. Then into it he blew the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Amen, amen, amen.
On behalf of the Benedict College family, I welcome you to Black History Month 2021. God has given our families His beautiful creation in which we were made wondrously in His image. We were not made first, but last, because none of the other animals or creations could carry out the much higher divine purpose of preserving this genius creation. Centuries later, and in this Black History Month 2021 celebration, during a time of worldwide pandemic, racial reckoning, economic displacement, learning interruption, and transformed virtual lives. We are again called to a higher purpose, this time to answer accountability questions. What have we done? What are we doing? And can we continue our fight to sustain the noble cause of this great creation? We celebrate and embrace the theme for Black History Month 2021, the role of the Black family, representation, identity, and diversity during a time of crisis that is also filled with great opportunities. The change in our Black History Month celebration this year is certainly not the one that we had hoped for nor desired. The 3 college assembly programs are all virtual, beginning with today's captivating survey of African American history, followed by the students' virtual depiction of the impact of the coronavirus on the lives of their families on February 16th, and finally, the induction of scholars into the honors program and the Listervelt Middleton Lecture Series on the 23rd. Significantly, the Harambee Festival has been reimagined and will be presented virtually on February 27, 2021, through a memory book and digital ads that will be aired over the Benedict College website and other social media platforms. The college invites vendors and all of our internal and community constituents to participate. Benedict College is navigating the challenges presented during these unprecedented times. As the college has made history since 1870, there is a story of accomplishment that still must be told, lives that must still be impacted, and a festival that will still continue with your support. Benedict College is pleased to present a series of programs that tell, analyze, and illuminate the African American experience. Let's begin by hearing a good story, a special story. Listen carefully as Miss Anita Prather, Auntie Pearlie Sue of the Asay Gullah Theater and contributor to South Carolina ETV documentaries on the Gullah culture, reminds us that the foundation of our existence is built upon an enduring belief that regardless of the questions posed by challenges, our answer has, is, and will always be, yes, we can. Once upon a time.
Hello, Benedict College family, and all those viewing from near and far. Come inside on Pearlie Sue's room and let me remind you that the role of the Black family, representation, identity, and diversity has played out in living color, no pun intended, across a cinematic screen stretching from the thriving continent of Africa, where women played a significant roles in their family structures that eventually formed the basic structure of government. Ancient Africa, the home of great pyramids, also excelled in medicine, mathematics, astronomy, geography, education, and religion, that did not distinguish between worshiping God from his creations. Then the whole story changed. African kings and queens were captured in Africa, transported in the belly of the slave ships across a vast ocean through the Middle Passage in the 16th and 18th centuries, and brought against their will into the Caribbean region, and were forced to replace their moral heroes of Isis and Horus with the legendary stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. By 1715, so many Africans had been imported into Charleston, South Carolina, that they outnumbered the whites in this involuntary Ellis Island. Slaves, the Sea Islands retained much of their African heritage, including the creation of a distinctive form of speech called Gullah. Well, you know, once upon a time, there'd been a man and his friend went to this restaurant and only to learn that they ain't had but one piece of chicken. One chicken leg, that's all they had. Well, they agreed that if they would go to sleep, and the one who dreamed a long, long time would get to eat the piece of chicken. Well, when he wake up, the first one say that he had dreamed that the angel Gabriel would come down and give him wings, and he flew straight into the open gates. Yeah, that's when the other man said, interrupt him and say, well, when you go to sleep, when I saw you flying, that's when I ate the chicken leg. Slaves in America displayed their resistance to their condition in the Stoner Rebellion in Charleston in 1739, Denmark Vesey Revolt in Charleston in 1822, the famous Nat Turner Rebellion in Southampton County, Virginia in 1831, and John's Brown Raid at Harper's Ferry, Virginia in 1859. As a result, South Carolina reacted by enacting more repressive laws called slave codes that made it illegal to teach slaves how to read or write, or for them to even assemble. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln articulated in an address at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, the clearest but yet the most paradoxical explanation of what American democracy meant since the Constitution was adopted. It was not until the 13th, 14th, and the 15th Amendments were passed by Congress, however, from 1865 to 1870, that nation moved closer toward the more perfect union. Now, the Reconstruction period, starting in 1861 to 1877, started when the day of Big Gun done shoot. That's what we colored folks call it. Now, that's the day when them 77 Union ships came all the way from Washington, D.C., down to Beaufort, South Carolina, the southern part, between Hilton Head and Bluffton. Yes, they did. And after 4.5 hours of bombarding 2 Confederate forts that was protecting that body of water called Port Royal Sound, which was the second natural deepest harbor in the United States, only second to New York City. And after 4.5 hours of that bombardment, them Confederate boys said, we better get on out here, they about to kill me. And all the Confederate soldiers evacuated Beaufort County. And on that day of November 7, 1861, the beginning of Reconstruction, the day when Big Gun done shoot, that's what the colored peoples call it. White folks call it the day of the great skedaddle. I tell you why. Because on that day, all the white peoples in Beaufort County skedaddled right on out, except one. And he was left drunk right down there at the waterfront park, and we was free. And that started Reconstruction, and it lasted until 1877. It provided opportunities for former slaves to participate in the political arena. South Carolina elected 2 black lieutenant governors, a Speaker of the House, 8 representatives to the U.S. House of Representatives, and don't forget General Robert Smalls, the first black hero of the Civil War. The Progressive State Constitution of 1868 enacted under black politicians for the first time a state-supported education system. You know what that means, Gal? That means a former slave who was denied the right to learn how to read and write wrote the first compulsory education that give we public education to this day. A black man was Arthur Robert Smalls. Yes, he was. The codification of a social conscience that preceded the New Deal's philosophy that the government had a role to take care of the citizens. While the political ascendancy of African Americans did not last during Reconstruction, the establishment of many of the nation's historically black colleges and universities, including Benedict College, Rochester, established in 1870. And in its founding days, when laws and customs were designed to defer the dreams, aspirations of African Americans, Benedict Institute, founded on a dilapidated slave owner's plantation, vowed to be a power for good in society. And its work would be, in the words of its founder, God's own right hand planting. The decade of the 1890s ushered in another period of pushback against apparent gains in the movement toward a more just society for all, and segregation was codified and enforced throughout the South. A state that could barely afford one good education, business, or recreation system for everybody was bound and determined to have 2 schools, 2 theaters, 2 recreation facilities, separate, unequal. The state was committed to its vow, formed after its Reconstruction experience, that this state would never belong to Negroes and Yankees again. Even in the worst of times, the indomitable spirit of progress and achievement shines through the darkness. For example, 1911, Benedict College implemented its football program, and Professor Ralph F. Bates was the coach and quarterback for the first few years. Bates also organized baseball in 1907 and served as coach. Purple and gold was chosen as the colors, and the Deacon was the mascot. Students changed the name of the mascot to the Tigers in 1938. By the turn of the century, America's involvement in 2 world wars, 1917 to 1945, exposed soldiers and citizens to a new world of opportunities and thinking. Resistance to the old order had the power of an idea whose time had come, articulated by Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. Declaration that as Black soldiers, we leave fighting, we return fighting. Meanwhile, thousands of African Americans believed that they had a chance to enjoy a better life if they migrated from the South to the North, especially during the 1920 to 1950, called the Great Migration. Women played an important role in this movement as they wanted their sons to leave a place where it was dangerous for them, to stand up for their dignity and move to cities where they should be at least be safer. Safer? Oh. But look at what happened to our sons and daughters in the cities over time. But oops, I'm getting ahead of the story, but I will return to it shortly. Promise you that. Emmett J. Scott described the incredible scene on a typical train station in South Carolina and across the South on Saturday nights when thousands of African Americans changed their goodbye from "if I don't see you again, meet me in heaven" to "if I don't see you again, meet me in Philadelphia." The scene, but finally, when the night of departure came, there were usually so many people at the train station that the police had to use force in order to get the passengers on and off the train. After the train was filled with as many passengers as it could hold, the old engine gave 1 or 2 puffs and pulled out, bound for the promised land. As passengers, we didn't get a chance to eat in the railroad dining cars, so Big Mama had to fix you something for them, for them chillins to eat. There were so many empty, greasy brown bags and shoe boxes left on the trains from the south to the southeast that the railroad officials termed these trains the chicken bone special. These new Northerners, created in the 1920s and extend even through today, the greatest African American literary periods known as the Harlem Renaissance. The expressions by writers and poets demonstrated creativity, genius, punctuated by pain, nagging pain, and the constant pain and hope by the same writer whose message in Mother to Son declared that life ain't been no Christmas day. But then in I Too further declare, I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat swell and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed, because I too am American. The push for equality continued through the 1950s and 1970s. The Briggs versus Elliott legal case filed in Somerton, South Carolina, became a part of and was instrumental in the landmark decision of Brown versus Board of Education decision that legally ended segregated schools in 1954. a preacher, a leader, and tied feet showed up in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955 and urged citizens not to ride the buses, while families in Darlington, South Carolina had to relift and return school buses that had been overturned by opponents of school desegregation to their rightful positions. While Black students desegregated Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957. College students who had stood for so long decided to sit in at the lunch counters in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1960. A Bloody Sunday occurred, Selma, Alabama in 1965. And in an effort to secure voting rights, Emmett Till and 3 young civil rights leaders were murdered in separate incidents in Greenwood, Mississippi. More college students joined the protest in the famous Friendship 9 in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And in 1968, in Benedict College, faculty and students stood tall in the civil rights movement of the 1960s and 1970s by protesting, being arrested, and winning important landmark civil rights legal cases right here in Columbia, South Carolina. The history of African Americans has more success stories than failures, due in part to the willingness of the American people of goodwill to work together. It is important to note that a segment of those in the white society has always stood up and helped to bend the moral arc of the universe toward justice. These fearless men and women created a legacy of remembrance from the slave insurrectionist leaders, abolitionists, the leaders who founded and supported efforts to provide educational opportunities for African Americans, from primary schools to the establishment of the nation's HBCUs, to those on the judiciary and other segments of the community who, with great danger to their lives, stood up, marched, provided financial support, and died for supporting the noble cause of democracy. When the day of reckoning came to pass, the Civil Rights Bill of 1965, the Voting Rights Act of 1968, and even to remove the Confederate flag from the State House grounds of South Carolina, descendants of slave owners joined with descendants of slaves to show the greatest promise of fulfilling the American dream. It is not forgotten that a Southerner president of the United States called the nation back to a greater sense of unity to sustain that creative genius that has proven over time to be much stronger and more binding than anything that divides blacks and white and other groups, when he invoked the promissory theme of the civil rights movement, grounded in scripture and embedded in the Constitution.
And we shall overcome.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. More importantly, the idea of blacks and whites working together gives testimony to the African proverb that teaches that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. During the Civil Rights Movement, Benedict College provided 2 of the most accomplished champions for justice and civil rights in the nation. Mrs. Majeska Simpkins worked with future Associate Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, who helped write the declaration for the school lawsuit Briggs versus Elliott that became one of the individual cases to directly challenge separate but equal doctrine, leading to the landmark Supreme Court case of Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas in 1954. Mrs. Septima Clark was fired as a school teacher in Charleston, South Carolina, for refusing to relinquish her membership in the NAACP, was hired by Tennessee's Highlander Folk School, where she provided the nonviolent philosophical underpinnings for Mrs. Rosa Parks and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King insisted that Mrs. Clark accompany him to Sweden in 1964 when he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize, acknowledging that she deserved as much credit for the achievements of the civil rights movement as he did. Dr. Bobby Donaldson, and lead scholar for Columbia, South Carolina, 63. Our Story Matters, a documentary history of the struggle for civil rights and social justice. In Columbia, Jonathan Johnson, project coordinator, Columbia, South Carolina, 63, is the research assistant. Benedict College and its students played an important yet unheralded role in the civil rights movement on the local, state, and national levels. South Carolina Movement Association to coordinate the protest efforts from all South Carolina Black colleges. Arnold M. Smith, first student to be arrested for loitering as a result of the protests in Columbia. Lenny Glover was stabbed seriously on March 5th, 1961 at the Woolworth department store. Benedict College student organized an Easter boycott of segregated businesses in what was called the Easter Lenny Glover No Buying Campaign. James Edwards, Milton Green, Charles Barr, C. students, and Simon Bowie, Allen University student, were arrested at Taylor Street Pharmacy for trespassing and disturbing the peace because they refused to leave after being denied service. Edwards versus South Carolina, Barr versus City of Columbia, Bowie versus City of Columbia. The students were convicted for protesting, but the United States Supreme Court overturned their convictions, and the rulings in these Benedict College students' cases were then cited in other sit-in cases across the country. Doris Glymph Green. Green and her friends sat at a drugstore lunch counters, but knowing that they would not be served. Green believed that their actions would, in time, create a change in the laws and mores in South Carolina. This was confirmed when the city leaders asked her and other students to attend a nonviolence training session in McIntosh, Georgia, in the early 1960s, conducted by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The facilitators at the conference were Andrew Young and Mrs. Septima Clark. Experience had a lasting effect. The fact that there was so much surrounding the conference house was boarded up, but the lights were turned off, caused Green to ask, what have I gotten myself into? The civil rights movement was a real life-changing event with personal safety ramifications. Sarah Mae Fleming versus South Carolina Electric and Gas. While not a Benedict College student, Sarah Mae Fleming, a domestic worker from Eastover, South Carolina, was arrested in 1954 for sitting in the whites-only section of a city bus. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that segregation on city buses were unconstitutional. This case is important because it preceded the famous Montgomery bus boycott that was precipitated by Mrs. Rosa Parks, who was inspired by Ms. Septima Clark, who is a Benedict College graduate and civil rights pioneer. Currently, Benedict College is contemplating plans to house the Septima Poinsett Clark Center for the Study of African American History and Women of the Movement. BC.
You know.
Benedict College's role in the civil rights movement is well documented along with its enduring legacy of providing quality education for more than 150 years. Its commitment to public service and transformative presence continues under the leadership of its 14th president, Dr. Rosalind Clark Artis.
This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Happy Black History Month 2021 to the Benedict College family, our staff, faculty, students, alumni, friends, and community. It is indeed a great day to be a part of the Tiger family. Benedict College has endured for more than 150 years, having been founded in 1870 by a Northern missionary for the purpose of educating the descendants of former slaves. Benedict College continues unto this day, having provided a high-quality education to a segment of the population long forgotten. Our purpose is clear, Our goals are obvious, and we are achieving at the highest levels across the campus and throughout the globe. Benedict College has always played a seminal role in the struggle for civil and human rights. Benedict College students, staff, and faculty have participated fully in the civil rights movement and continue unto this day advocating for all that is good and decent in our world. Let us pause this Black History Month to reflect on the contributions of Benedict College alumni in the struggle for civil and human rights. Let us remember Septima Clark, the trailblazing civil rights activist known as the mother of the civil rights movement, who tirelessly advocated for education as a means to achieving full equality. That is a principle we believe deeply in here at Benedict College. And as our young folks say, ain't nothing changed. We've been around 150 years, and we are committed now more than ever to ensuring equity and inclusion in our world and our society and our community. Benedict College is poised to make impact at every turn. Through our innovative curriculum, our co-curricular and extracurricular offerings, Benedict engages its students in answering life's most critical questions: when and where we enter. Questions of time, place, space, and race. Benedict College students are ready, willing, and able to contribute. They are evidence of God's right hand planting, and they are a power for good in our society. Let us pause to reflect on the contributions we have made and the contributions yet to be made on the campus of Benedict College. God bless you and keep you as we celebrate this Black History Month 2021.
Benedict College has welcomed more than 18,000 alumni into its family for a season to embed in them the Benedict College promise, and then intentionally sent her graduates back to their own families and to their communities across the nation and around the world, empowering them to represent the best of BC. Some thought that this story would end with the assassination of the Dreamer in 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee. And that brings me back to the painfully wrong idea that our sons and daughters would be safe in the cities. Unfortunately, that was not true for King, Malcolm X, and for parents who sent their children to South Carolina State University to be educated in the safe confines of the academy, not for a distinguished line of martyrs, known and unknown, whose death raised the question that begins with, why? Why is there so much death? Why did they have to die? Why? 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 The second question begins with how. How did we stray so far from the intention of sustaining the great creation that was given to us in love? We look no further than June 2015 to see almost inconsolable grief followed by good when a segregationist who intended to start a race war murdered the pastor of Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, along with 8 of his parishioners, immediately following Bible study, in which the culprit was invited to participate. However, within a month, the Confederate flag, long a source of division, was removed from the State House grounds in Columbia, South Carolina. The families of the Charleston Nine were recognized and their fallen heroes honored in a moving college assembly at Benedict College in February 2016. The third question begins with can. Can we still sustain this great creative genius? Before we answer that question, let us remember the sisters and brothers, husbands and wives who died as their blood spilled from their bodies while they waited to change their mortality into immortality.
When it's all said and done, we'll cry.
Let's never forget them nor remember to call their names.
Oh, glory.
Even after these circumstances, the African American story continues to receive rave reviews with an expanded case of school teachers, lawyers, students, HBCUs, as well as entire families striving for representation, identity, and diversity, staring the unknown. Yet well-known Leroy, Miss Kizzy, Cal Unisha, Ray Ray, Big Mama, and of course Junior, who became the first in his family to graduate from college. Then lo and behold, another movie sequel played out at the turn of the 21st century for the family based on the theme of hope and change in Chicago, Illinois, that culminated with the election of President Barack Obama. It fully embraced the message of the higher calling of the great creation and simultaneously brought to life the spirit and the letter of the Constitution, answered the long-anticipated prayers of the faithful, and set the stage for America to move further toward its ideal with the historic election of Kamala Harris as the first African-American female vice president of the United States on November 3rd, 2020. Let this be the critique of this family history from every hillside, mountain, hamlet, village, town, and city in the United States of America that is written in the blood of the martyred and slaughtered, but memorialized and raised up high, sometimes with militant determination, at other times in quiet defiance. But there always remains faith and hope that no matter what comes or goes, from slavery to freedom, from disappointments to achievements, from pandemics to restoration, African American history at its very core is a collection of powerful, recurring stories of ordinary people achieving extraordinary things that are always followed by more struggles by celebrated people and more often by our friends, colleagues, and families. History ultimately leads to the time-honored celebration of people in their indomitable, overcoming spirits in their lives and in their families. Any remaining questions about whether this present generation can continue the legacy of sustaining and preserving this great creation have been answered over and over, from Chennai, India, to Chicago, Illinois, to Washington, D.C., to Columbia, South Carolina, and around the world, inspiring us to answer the great creation's accountability question with a resounding, yes, we can, yes, we can, yes, we can.
This election had many firsts and many stories that will be told for generations, but one that's on my mind tonight is about a woman who cast her ballot in Atlanta. She is a lot like the millions of others who stood in line to make their voice heard in this election, except for one thing. Ann Nixon Cooper is 106 years old. She was born just a generation past slavery, a time when there were no cars on the road or planes in the sky, when someone like her couldn't vote for two reasons: because she was a woman and because of the color of her skin. And tonight, I think about all that she's seen throughout her century in America: the heartache and the hope, the struggle and the progress, the times we were told that we can't, and the people who pressed on with that American creed, yes, we can. At a time when women's voices were silenced and their hopes dismissed, she lived to see them stand up and speak out and reach for the ballot. Yes, we can. When there was despair in the Dust Bowl and depression across the land, she saw a nation conquer fear itself with a new deal, new jobs, a new sense of common purpose. Yes, we can. When the bombs fell on our harbor and tyranny threatened the world, she was there to witness a generation rise to greatness and a democracy was saved. Yes, we can. She was there for the buses in Montgomery, the hoses in Birmingham, a bridge in Selma, and a preacher from Atlanta who told the people that we shall overcome. Yes, we can. A man touched down on the moon. A wall came down in Berlin. Our world was connected by our own science and imagination. And this year, in this election, she touched her finger to a screen and cast her vote. Because after 106 years in America, through the best of times and the darkest of hours, she knows how America can change. Yes, we can. America, we have come so far. We have seen so much, but there's so much more to do. So tonight, let us ask ourselves, if our children should live to see the next century, if my daughters should be so lucky to live as long as Ann Nixon Cooper, what change will they see? What progress will we have made? This is our chance to answer that call. This is our moment. This is our time to put our people back to work and open doors of opportunity for our kids, to restore prosperity and promote the cause of peace, to reclaim the American dream and reaffirm that fundamental truth that out of many we are one, that while we breathe, we hope, and where we are met with cynicism and doubt and those who tell us that we can't, we will respond with that timeless creed that sums up the spirit of a people. Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
نعم نستطيع.
Yes, we can.
Yebo singakwazi.
Yes, we can.
僕たちならできる。
Yes, we can.
hongo tinokwanisa.
Yes, we can.
Sí podemos.
Yes, we can.
አዎ እንችላለን።
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Mommy tuning.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.